So welcome to lecture 11 on incident management. Incident management response is related to the fact that incidents, negative events that occur at the organization will drain resources and be extensive. So if we don't have a policy in place, we haven't thought through these things, we will have to go to hire outside consultants, or we'll have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to respond. So the time to develop a plan for an incident is before the incident occurs. And so oftentimes people plan through crisis, and that's not a great approach. So incident preparedness involves having policies, strategies and plans, procedures in place to deal with particular incidents. So for example, let's say somebody is dealing with confidential information. They leave their laptop unlocked, it gets accessed. What do you do in that particular scenario? What does the policy say that you should do? How will that be reported? All of these things are related to an incident response, because that's not something you expect. Now, you need to distinguish incidences from breaches where data is in fact lost or accessed in an unauthorized way, and then understand the related regulatory requirements that are going to be associated with that, because in many cases you're going to be required, you need to know that you're going to be required to report that to the Privacy Commission in some cases. So organizations should create written guidelines with supporting documentation, train personnel, and engage in mock exercises. So oftentimes you work in organizations where they haven't experienced this yet, they haven't experienced a breach, they haven't experienced a hack, but we are in constant preparation for when this does happen, we're not at a complete loss. And so, the actual incidents are not the time to learn. And because many companies are affected by cyber breaches today, there are many circumstances where we need to make clear what the policy is, so people know quickly how to respond. So a security incident is an adverse event that threatens business security or disrupts service. Now, that shouldn't be confused with a disaster, but the difference is that the information security incident will affect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data. Whereas a disaster will result in widespread damage and potentially loss of life. Those are how those things are different. And so that sort of wraps up the end of our course, and I look forward to seeing you in class. So in this lecture, I'll be discussing incident management and providing a review of the course. An incident response is necessary because incidents can drain resources and can be really expensive. The time to develop an incident response plan is before the incident occurs. And you need to have preparedness. You need to have policies and strategies and plans and procedures in place to deal with responding to incidents. So organizations should create written guidelines, that's with supporting documentation, train personnel, and engage them in mock exercises. So the actual incident is not the time to learn. You should be trying to anticipate incidents before they occur. So what is a security incident? Well, an information security incident is an adverse event that threatens business security or disrupts service. So sometimes that's confused with a disaster, but the difference is an information security incident affects the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the data, whereas disaster is more widespread. That'll involve loss of life, etc., damage to plant or facilities. So every organization should be familiar and be prepared to respond to at least the following core groups of attacks. So intentional unauthorized access. So this can occur when an insider, an employee, for example, or an intruder gains logical or physical access without permission. And then there's denial of service attacks, which will prevent or impair the normal authorized functionality of the organization's networks, systems, and applications. Malware can result in a security incident. A malware that has been successfully quarantined by antivirus, that shouldn't be considered an incident, actually, because that demonstrates that the technical procedures we have in place are working. But when there is inappropriate usage, that occurs when an authorized user, somebody who's authorized to use, performs an action that violates company policy, let's say their user agreement, or a law or a regulation. That can be considered a security incident also. So we need to prioritize and specify different levels of severity. Each level will have a maximum response time and a minimum internal notification requirements. So level 1, they are going to be could cause significant harm. Level 2, compromise of unauthorized access to non-critical systems. And level 3, situations that can be contained and resolved by the information system custodian, the data process owner, or HR personnel. Employees should be required and encouraged, in fact, to report all or actual or suspected incidents. An employee who discovers an incident may not be trained or an IT technician, in fact. Because it's going to know something's wrong. They need to be able to know who to send that information onto. So the culture of the company needs to incorporate this point. So, employees don't feel like they're being ridiculed if they're wrong or if they've made a mistake. They should be encouraged, in fact, to report incidents to the IT security department. And for that reason, the IT security department should be approachable in this regard. An incident response program is composed of the policies, plans, procedures, and people. An IRP, an incident response plan, is a roadmap of preparation, response, recovery, and documentation actions. So incident response procedures are detailed steps, the detailed steps needed to implement the plan. So you want to engage in the following types of activities with your plan. You've got to be involved with preparation. You have to develop an incident response capabilities, detection and investigation, initial response, containment, eradication and recovery, notification, closure of the incident or post-incident activity, so let's say any remedial action that you'll take, and documentation and evidence handling requirements. Let's say, for example, for the purposes of potential litigation in the future. Key people involved with incident management would be the incident response coordinator, and that's the person who's the central point of contact for all incidents. They verify and log the incident. The designated incident handler is a senior level personnel who has crisis management and communication skills, experience and knowledge to handle the incident. And then the incident response team, that's a trained team of people that provide services through the incident life cycle. So they're the group that's going to field complaints and work through the incident, capture the information, and respond as appropriate. Responders should receive specific training to how their individual and what their individual and collective responsibilities are. There should be recurring tests, drills, challenging response exercises, and that can make a big difference. Knowing what's expected tends to reduce errors and decreases the pressure on response. If you've practiced it in the past, then you will be much better placed if an incident does occur. So the exercise is not to get an A necessarily, but just to kind of evaluate the plan and procedures, identify any missing resources, any gaps in the procedure, and learn how to work with people in the organization. The investigation and evidence handling should be thoroughly documented. That's not always done because at the time of an incident, there's a lot of panic. There may be changes in staff, for example, and under those circumstances, or the file either gets misplaced or isn't. There are going to be significant gaps there, and when somebody else comes to review it, you have to reconstruct the timeline, which can be time-consuming. So depending on the incident, it may be necessary to contact local, state, or federal law enforcement. So you have to treat the investigation as though it would lead to a court case. So, for example, if there's been a privacy breach or there's been a cyber attack where personal information has been lost or stolen, then we're going to have to document the incident response in order to satisfy the opposing counsel or regulators. So incident handlers that perform forensic analysis should be familiar with forensic principles, guidelines, procedures, and tools, as well as the techniques involved in forensic analysis. The process of digital forensics will include the collection, examination, analysis, and reporting. There has to be a chain of custody that applies to physical, digital, and forensic evidence, and that's used to prove that the evidence has not been altered. That becomes really important in litigation. And then the evidence should be stored in a secure location. So we want to encourage people to report incidents. It's a difficult problem because either the people don't really like if they're at fault, they may want to cover their tracks, for example. They're worried about how that's going to affect their performance evaluation, let's say, and so there are a number of mistakes that are made by organizations regarding the handling of reporting. And so if it's not clear that employees are not going to be dismissed or they're not going to be disciplined for reporting, and that it should be encouraged, then it makes it a lot easier to encourage people to report. There are requirements in the case of a data breach. There are it's sort of a different level because there are now requirements to notify regulators, depending on the industry that you're in, of the fact that there's been a data breach, and they will come in and audit and make recommendations, make remedial actions, let you know whether or not you need to notify the person affected, for example. That investigation by the regulator will determine any kind of remedial action. They'll try to determine who's at fault. They'll determine whether or not the policies, the first thing they'll look at is whether or not the policies were in place and whether or not they were in fact being followed. With financial institutions, if you're going to give notice, you have to have a description of the incident. You have to have the type of information subject to the unauthorized access. There has to be measures taken by the institution to protect from further unauthorized access. So, for example, dark web monitoring or credit monitoring. Normally, there is usually a phone number set up for information or assistance, and then there's reminders put out for the customer to remain vigilant in the next 2 years even. Do these notices work? If you have to send out notices to thousands of customers, and you've got to know, you got to inform them of what data was lost, what data you had in their possession, what data was compromised. That's super expensive to do. And customers need to know how to protect themselves. And so, you have to have a good policy around this in advance. Whether or not you report to the Privacy Commission is dependent on whether or not there is what's known as a real risk of significant harm, and a determination will be made as to whether or not you have to give notice to the individual affected, and or whether or not you have to provide remediation. That is to say, something like credit card monitoring, or a dark web monitoring, for example, to protect them in the future. And those things are really expensive, to do actually. A best practice with data breaches is to get it over with, to be humble, not to lie, because if that gets found out later, then that becomes a major problem. And so you need to keep your communications to the minimum and what's relevant. You don't want to wait to until the breach happens to create a PR preparedness plan. But there are the security specialists, IT, should work with PR to identify the worst breach scenario, so they can message that they can deal with setting expectations, let's say, around what was lost. And you have to be really careful around these types of public statements at this point, because it's likely to be used as a basis of initiating litigation later on. So let's see what you should have learned from this class. Returning to the start, you should be able to identify policies, prevent certain security risks. You should be able to write or overhaul a policy. You need to know how to increase the chances of your policy being adopted. What are the mistakes in writing a policy? The advantages of the ISO framework, the framework itself, and specifics about the various domains. You should know the role of policies, how important they are to overall security in an organization. You need to think through the assumptions to show that something is secure, and how these assumptions relate to. You should be able to write a policy. There are many different paths you can take, but there are few effective ones. You need to be strategic in your approach. You want to make sure that your policy contains the requisite elements, so the introduction, the policy statement, policy enforcement, exceptions, etc. You need to know what content goes into a consolidated versus a singular policy document. You can use the ISO framework as a guide. You need to be able to separate out supporting material, so you incorporate by reference, let's say, standards, guidelines, procedures, for example. You want to make sure that you have, that your audience will adopt the policy. You need to make sure it's appropriate, that you have interviewed, consulted a few key people during its development, the development of the policy. You've got to be able to identify gaps that have to be addressed in awareness training. And you need to make sure that your policy addresses the reasons why the policy is being introduced. This is very important, because if people don't know why they are doing something, they're going to be less motivated actually to adopt the policy. So your ability to explain why your policy is necessary to somebody who may not be an IT professional is particularly important. You need to know the kind of mistakes that can be made in writing policy, things you want to watch out for. So these are things like being unclear, that'll lead to improper implementation, being directed to the wrong audience. In that case, it'll get ignored. The policy's out of date or has inappropriate content. You want to make sure that your policy is taken seriously. And most importantly, you need to make sure that senior management is involved, has buy-in, let's say. so that they are going to enforce the policy. You should have learned the importance of the ISO framework, and that'll outline what's normally needed in security policies. It provides a guide. It's not, it shouldn't be just kind of simply copied and pasted, because every company is slightly different, and they'll have different emphasis, but it provides a very, very useful, robust framework. So it's a very common way of organizing policies. It makes it easier to locate the relevant parts. So you need to be able to advocate why using a framework is going to be advantageous to a government that has to conform to numerous regulations. Because you need to be able to be, your policy library has to be very organized for it to be workable. There were lots of specifics in this class relating to asset control, personnel security. We discussed physical environmental security, communications operations management, access control, software development, and finally, business continuity. So ultimately, you should be able to answer questions about policies in certain scenarios. So for example, here is a security threat. What policy statements would prevent it from happening? What security domain does it fall under? You need to be able to kind of locate that in your mind. This is a policy. What security threats does it protect against? Does it actually protect against this threat? Right? And so thinking this way, or thinking, be able to question the policy, be able to, examine it critically, is a key skill that's really valuable for you as you, enter into, working for companies, because you will have to work with policies for sure. And I hope this course has been helped you, be able to do that effectively. So thanks very much, and I'll see you in class. And take care. Bye-bye.